Hey guys, it's Warners, and today I'm going to be ranking the top 10 most improved first level spells introduced in the 2024 Player's Handbook. I will discuss the old version of the spell, and then discuss the newly updated version, and then I will rank the old version, and then also rank the new version of the spell. So these spells are ranked from 10 to 1, 10 being my least excited spell change, and 1 being my most excited spell change. But I will also be ranking the old version of the spell versus the new version of the spell, so you can kind of see how much the spell is improved with the new rules. Now I'll go over my spell ranking criteria. So we have D through S, D being you probably should never take this spell. C is situationally useful, or they just might not scale very well. Like they might be very useful below level 5, but as soon as you hit tier 2, they just become not very useful and not worth using or even keeping on your spell list. B tier is, this is a really solid option, but it's not for everyone. So on some characters this is pretty good, on other characters not so much. A tier is, this is just a really good spell that is useful most of the time. And S tier is, this spell is amazing. This spell is so good, you might want to take a level 1 dip in another class to gain access to it, or take the Magic Initiate, Wizard, Druid, or Cleric to get access to this spell. Remember, this is specifically the improved spells, so spells like Shield are obviously A or S tier, but the spell basically didn't change at all. This is specifically the top 10 spells that have improved the most. Let's go ahead and get into it then. Alright, so number 10 is Color Spray. So Color Spray is a spell that you cast as a 15-foot cone, and in this 2014 version, you essentially roll 6d10. As long as the creatures within the cone's hit points are equal to or below the number you rolled, then they're blinded until the end of your next turn. First of all, that means it'll be an average of 30 hit points to work with at the first level, and then it has an upcast of 2d10, and so that's an average of about 5. So we're looking at an average of 35 at second level, an average of 40 at third level, and you go on, and you can keep going up from there. This just doesn't scale very well, and then they're only blinded until the end of your next turn, so it's really not that useful. And look how much text is in this first level spell. It's such a hassle to use. It took up a lot of time. I actually have never seen this cast at any table I've been at. And then the updated 2024 version is very simple now. You also cast it in a 15-foot cone, and if creatures fail a Constitution saving throw, then they're blinded till the end of your next turn. Very simple, pretty good for a first level spell. Not amazing still, because it's only till the end of your next turn anyway. And because of that, I ranked the original 2014 version a D tier. I would never take this spell, and it is better now, but it's only a C tier. It's a spell that you have to get really close, and it only lasts till the end of your next turn. So yeah, it's situationally pretty good, but not amazing. And then we got number 9, Sleep. This spell worked very similar to Color Spray. So it has a 90-foot range and a 20-foot area centered on a point within that range. And essentially you roll 5d8, which is an average of 20 hit points. And the creatures within that area, starting with the lowest creature's hit points, they become unconscious, which is really useful, but it doesn't scale very well, similar to Color Spray. But what's nice is there's no saving throw on this. If you're fighting a bunch of low HP goblins at low levels, this is basically a low level hypnotic pattern to use on like goblins or kobolds. So yeah, it had its place in 2014 rules, but you basically never cast it after a certain level. And then we have the 2024 version. They kind of nerfed it and buffed it at the same time. So the new version has a 60-foot range instead of a 90-foot range, and the area of effect is now a measly 5-foot radius sphere. So you can essentially get 2 targets, but most of the time probably 1. The 2 targets would have to be right next to each other. Then they make a wisdom saving throw, whereas before they didn't have to make a wisdom saving throw. And then they gain the incapacitated condition if they fail until the end of their next turn, and then they repeat the save again. And if they fail a second time, then they have the unconscious condition. And just like before, and with similar spells like Hypnotic Pattern, if anyone damages them or anything like that, then the spell ends. And there's now no longer an upcast, but there doesn't really need to be an upcast for it. So a way to think about it is at low levels, it's not as good as it used to be, but now this spell can be used all the way to level 20 and be pretty good, especially if if you don't have access to spells like Hypnotic Pattern, and you only need to shut down like 1 or 2 creatures. And with that being said, before it was situationally good but didn't upcast well, and now it's a pretty good spell for some builds with a B tier, and it used to be a C. So number 8 is Comprehend Languages. Now, technically, this spell hasn't changed at all, but there are rules in the game that have changed that make this spell a bit better than it used to be. So if you don't know, Comprehend Languages basically makes it so that you can understand any spoken language for about an hour. There's a small change that's not super important. You can also understand sign language, and sign language was added to the list of languages. But the main reason why I have this as an improved spell is in 2014 rules, languages were pretty cheap to get. You could pick any language at character creation, and you seem to get so many languages thrown at you all the time. Now in character creation, there's only a small list of language proficiencies, and unless I'm forgetting, it seems only rangers have access to the more diverse languages as a base class. So yeah, languages are just a bit harder to come by in these updated rules, so I would say Comprehend Languages becomes a bit better of a spell. With that being said, the original version was situational, sometimes useful, with a C tier, and now I would say it's at a B tier. It is definitely a pretty good spell, and you should probably take this one. And then number 7, we have Jump. So first of all, Jump had a casting time of an action, and basically you would touch a creature and their jump distance would triple until the spell ends. The problem is jumping rules are very weird and specific, and they are reliant on your strength score, and it's just kind of hard to calculate for the average D&D player. Most of the time when this spell was ever cast, the dungeon master would have to be reminded of the jumping rules, at least in my experience, and then it was a full action to cast, which spells like this typically aren't very fun as a full action cast, especially because it only lasts for 1 minute. So you typically would have to cast it in combat. And in combat, how often are you needing to take a full action to jump? Not very often, in my opinion. But they updated it in the 2024 rules, and now it is a bonus action. But not only that, now it says once on each of your turns until the spell ends, the creature you touch can jump 30 feet, but only spend 10 feet of movement. So let's say you have a base movement speed of 30 feet. You can move 20 feet and then jump 30 feet. So it's kind of a interesting way to, first of all, gain access to some verticality that your character might not have had much of. But also you could use it to just long jump, and so you basically make your movement speed from being 30 feet to 50 feet. So that's pretty nice. Also, previously it did not upcast, but now it does. If you upcast it to level 2, you can cast it on 2 creatures and keeps going up with every level. So yeah, pretty good upgrade. I would have ranked it D tier in 2014. I never took this spell, and I never saw other people take it, and I felt like it was probably a good idea to never take this spell. But now I feel like it's a pretty solid spell, and I think most people should take this if they have access to it. So number 6 is Witch Bolt. So Witch Bolt is a spell that had a 30-foot range action to cast. You roll to hit a target, and if you hit, you do 1d12 damage, and then you concentrate on the spell, and every turn after that, as long as you stay concentrating, you can deal 1d12 damage to the target, but you have to make sure you are within that 30-foot range, and if the target is ever outside of that 30-foot range, the spell ends, or if it has total cover from you. And 1d12 at level 1 is pretty good, especially because on your subsequent turns, you don't need to roll to hit again. So let's say someone has them grappled, then, oh wow, I can do 1d12 damage every round without rolling to hit. But it's your full action every time, and then, oh, it has an upcast. What's the upcast? The upcast upgrades the damage by 1d12, but only for the initial casting. It doesn't work on subsequent attacks. So not a very good upcast. As soon as you hit higher levels, this spell is just not very useful, and it's much better to concentrate on basically any other spell, even at low levels. But they upgraded the spell, so it's still an action to cast, but they doubled the range from 30 feet to 60 feet. They also doubled the initial damage. Instead of 1d12, it's now 2d12 lightning damage. And now on subsequent turns, you can use your bonus action to add 1d12 lightning damage. And then the upcast stays the same. You get to add 1d12 to the initial casting. Sorry, I kind of cut it off a bit in the image on screen, but that is pretty good. This spell doesn't upcast super well, but if you just want to deal some extra damage with your bonus action, this spell is really useful, and I would say it is pretty usable up until middle of tier 2. So the 2014 version was definitely a D tier for me, and I would say it got brought up to a B. I would consider this a low B because it still doesn't upcast super well, but it upcasts well enough that I think it still deserves the spot in B tier, but just barely. And then we have Divine Favor. So this is a Paladin exclusive spell, casting time of a bonus action, and it's a concentration spell for 1 minute. And basically you get to add 1d4 radiant damage to all your attacks. This is a very, very simple improvement. It went from concentration to no longer concentration. So now Paladins, as a bonus action, they can add 1d4 to all their attack rolls. RIP the Ranger. And so I would say on the Paladin, I never saw people using Divine Favor in 2024, and concentrating on Divine Favor when you have spells like Bless just didn't feel very good. But now that's no longer concentration, I think it went all the way from D tier to B tier. It's pretty good, even for Paladins at higher levels, in my opinion. And then in the number 4 slot, I decided to add 2 spells. We got Cure Wounds and Healing Word. They're both very similar spells, but the tier rankings are going to be a bit different. Basically, what they did with Cure Wounds and Healing Word is Cure Wounds was 1d8 plus your spellcasting modifier in healing as an action, and Healing Word was 1d4 plus your spellcasting modifier as a bonus action. They upgraded the healing for both. Cure Wounds is now 2d8 plus your spellcasting modifier, and Healing Word is now 2d4 plus your spellcasting modifier. And as you upcast every level, the healing for Cure Wounds goes up by 2d8, and the healing for Healing Word goes up by 2d4. So they not only boosted healing in the base spells, they also boosted the upcast significantly. This basically changes the whole playstyle of D&D 5e, in my opinion, when it comes to healing, and it makes healing builds way more viable than they used to be. I talk about this exact same thing in my recent video about Paladins. I'll put a card up in the corner, check it out. But that being said, the rankings, Cure Wounds, I put it in D tier, but maybe that's a little unfair. I will put it in high D tier for 2014. You should probably take it for classes like Rangers and Paladins, but for most classes, you probably never took this spell. But the main reason why classes would never take this spell is because Healing Word was right there. And so yeah, I would say Cure Wounds went all the way from D tier to B tier. It's now a pretty good spell, and a decent amount of characters should consider taking it. You can actually keep up with damage rather than just having to get up your 1 HP ally, and an action is worth that potentially. And then Healing Word was already really great in 2014 because it used to be like the spell you use for healing, because you used to only do yo-yo healing where people would only heal their allies when they went down to 0 hit points. So a nice bonus action Healing Word was pretty useful, but now it still serves that same purpose but is way more boosted in its healing capabilities. So I would say it went from A tier all the way to S tier. There's plenty of builds that I would take Magic Initiate Cleric just to get this spell, or maybe even take a level dip just to get access to Healing Word on a build that didn't have access to it. So yeah. And then number 3, we have Searing Smite. So this is a Paladin exclusive spell, and it worked like how all the other old Smite spells used to work. You use a bonus action, and then on your next hit, the effect is activated, and it requires concentration. This would add 1d6 fire damage to the target, and while you concentrate on it, at the start of each of the target's turns, they make a Constitution saving throw, and if they fail, they take 1d6 fire damage again. If they succeed, succeed, the spell ends. They could also use their action to put the fire out and end the spell, or some other effect like jumping in water. And then it has a horrible upcast where only the initial damage is upgraded, and then the concentration damage stays at 1d6. And it's also something that you have to do before you attack. You have to use your bonus action to concentrate on it. Let's say you miss your attack and you're still concentrating on it. You could take damage between turns and lose the spell, and essentially wasting a spell slot. Now, the new Searing Smite, it still uses a bonus action, but it works how all the other new Smite spells work. It says bonus action, which you take immediately after hitting a target with a melee weapon or an unarmed strike. So basically you hit and then you're concentrating on it. So that's already a boost on its own. And then it does the same thing, 1d6 fire damage at the start of their turns unless they succeed on a Constitution saving throw. If they succeed, the spell ends. They can no longer use their action to get rid of it or jump in water and get rid of it. And then now all the damage increases with an upcast. So this spell is really good at higher levels. You could use a 3rd level slot and they take 3d6 fire damage at the beginning of every turn. And it doesn't require a bonus action or action to maintain this damage. They just have to keep failing their con saves. And so in the 2014 rules, I would have considered Searing Smite a spell that I would never take. But now I think it's a really good spell. So 2014 D tier, and in 2024 it is an A tier spell in my opinion. And then we have Armor of Agathys, the Warlock exclusive, amazing spell. I've always loved this spell, but now it's even better. So basically how the spell worked in the 2014 rules is as a full action, you give yourself 5 temporary hit points as you put ice armor on your body. Now, every time someone hits you with an attack, as long as you maintain those temporary hit points that you got from this spell, they take 5 damage. And every time you upcast this spell, it goes up in temporary hit points and it goes up in damage. So for example, let's say you cast this at level 5, you get 25 temporary hit points. If someone deals 10 damage to you, they still take 25 points of cold damage until the temporary hit points run out. Now, if you get temporary hit points from another effect, then the spell ends if you choose to accept those temporary hit points. This was a really popular spell, and a lot of people really like this spell, but it still required a full action, and so sometimes it felt bad. It did last a whole hour though, so you could cast this outside of combat when you are expecting combat to happen soon. This was a good spell, but they made it even better. So they changed the casting time to a bonus action. Besides that, it essentially works the same, except for one other factor. Now, as long as you have any temporary hit points, the spell effect remains. So let's say you cast at 5th level, you got 25 temporary hit points, and let's say you take 24 points of damage. So you have 1 temporary hit point left. Then you cast False Life and you get 8 temporary hit points back. Now, if you take 7 damage, they still take 25 and you still have Armor of Agathys up. So yeah, this spell went from good to great. So yeah, I would say it went from a B to an A. It was already pretty good and they made it even better. I would say it's definitely a high A too. It's not quite an S for me, but if I ever play a Warlock again, I'm definitely gonna use this spell way more often than I did previously. And I could see many people taking a multi-class to gain access to this spell. There's a very famous Barbarian Warlock multi-class that uses this spell very effectively, and now it's even better. All right, now we have our last one. Number 1, we have Chromatic Orb. So Chromatic Orb was a sorcerer and wizard spell, and essentially you make a ranged spell attack at a creature and they take 3d8 damage of whatever elemental damage type you choose. Acid, cold, fire, lightning, poison, or thunder. And it went up by 1d8 as you upcasted it. So it's single target, a specific damage type, decent damage. The thing about this spell though is it was mostly useful for the sorcerer because they didn't have access to that many spells, and so it was nice to have one spell that you could basically choose any element you needed for whatever situation. Wizards having access to more spells tended to not take this as often, so it was a decent spell but not amazing. The new Chromatic Orb is almost exactly the same, except they added a whole new secondary effect that makes this a multi-target spell now. So you roll your 3d8 in damage, and if any of those 3d8 dice are the same number, you can then select a second target and hit them as well. I actually did a whole build around this in acid damage, and you can check that build right there in the card. One cool interaction with this spell is you can take the elemental adept feat, and if you choose a specific damage type, like let's say acid damage, and whenever you use Chromatic Orb, you use the acid damage option. You roll 3d8. Any ones you roll become 2s, and so if you roll a 1 and a 2, you actually rolled 2 2s, and because of that, you can hit another target with it. Again, it's not great that you rolled lower damage, but at least you got that second hit in. What's also great is as you upcast this, you get more d8s, and so every time you upcast it, there's a higher chance that you're going to be able to hit another target. Also, the amount of times it can leap is limited to the spell level you cast it at. So if you cast it at 3rd level, it can bounce 3 times. If you cast it at 4th level, it can bounce 4 times. But once you get to like 5th level, it's very unlikely for it to not bounce at least once. And that's 78 of whatever damage type you're doing on multiple targets. That ends up being a pretty good amount of damage. Again, it's limited to 30-foot range between each target, but that's a pretty good range. So I really like this upgrade to the spell, and I feel like it went from being a pretty good spell that didn't upcast amazingly to being a really good spell. So it went from a C tier to an A tier in my book. If you like this video, go ahead and like it down below, and then I might do a whole video on 2nd level spells, 3rd level spells, and I might go all the way up to 9th level spells. Let me know down below if you think I'm right or wrong about my rankings for these spells. And let me know what 1st level spell you thought was improved that I didn't mention. Thank you guys so much for watching, and have a great rest of your day. Check out this video right here. Peace.